Hello there, and welcome to Grass Me Up, the turf care podcast from Utrema. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today's episode is all about glyphosate. You may have heard of glyphosate, or you might have heard of it from its trade name, Roundup. Now, it gets confusing because the Roundup that is for sale to home and garden customers in the UK no longer contains the active ingredient glyphosate. However, the product for commercial use on lawns and, well, not on lawns, around lawns and in agriculture still contains glyphosate. And we'll talk about why that is, why that's been removed. But yeah, what's glyphosate and why it's used? So it's a herbicide, a chemical herbicide that is used to control weeds. It's non-selective, so you wouldn't put it onto the lawn, but you would use it on paths, and it's systemic, so it moves around the plants. You might spot treat a dandelion and it would go to the roots and it would kill the roots off, so that's why it's really good. It's a systemic herbicide. It's used routinely before seeding, and the beauty of it is that it's deactivated, not broken down, deactivated as soon as it hits the soil. So glyphosate is good for a number of uses. It's probably the most widely used herbicide, weed killer in the world. However, it comes with its issues, and in the US there's been a number of court cases, and people have sued the owners of Roundup for millions, and successfully. And so it's got this link now to cancer and carcinogens. Now, whether that is true or not, I am not an expert in toxicology. However, I do know that a lot of the proponents, the people who on the internet, on social media, who are claiming glyphosate is safe, are using a graph, a table, to show that it's really, really non-toxic compared to household items and basic chemicals. And the first thing I want to say is that this is complete nonsense, because they are using the data for LD50, the lethal dose 50. And this is all about, if a mouse or you were to eat it, what is the dose that would kill 50% of the population that ate it? And that obviously that's worked out by feeding it to poor animals in labs and things like that. But this is all about acute toxicity. This is whether it's going to kill you in a day or two. This is not about whether you're going to develop cancer from consuming it after long-term exposure. And that is the issue with glyphosate. Is the big question is it carcinogenic? And does it have other health-related issues? It's not about, does it kill you within 2 days? Because it doesn't kill you if you consume it within 2 days. We know that. So a lot of the people who should know better, a lot of the scientists, a lot of the distributors of glyphosate, Roundup, are using this graph. And I want to tell you that is complete and utter nonsense. I'm not swearing on this podcast because you might be in the car, in the van with some kids, or at home. So I don't swear on the podcast, but it is complete and utter nonsense. Now, glyphosate is a very active chemical. As I said, the other thing that people who promote glyphosate use and think it's safe, the other thing they say is it's deactivated as soon as it hits the soil. It's deactivated, but it's not broken down. It's actually quite hard for the microbes to break down glyphosate in the soil. It will eventually break down to phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon, its component elements. However, it's not broken down. It's still a phosphonate in the soil, and they're quite residual. And so this claim that it's broken down or it's deactivated doesn't hold true. And the other reason it doesn't hold true is that it can affect crops for a longer period of time. And people didn't really realize this for a long time, but they've now got glyphosate-eating microbes that can actually boost yield in crops if they're applied to the field. And so if you've got lawn care that's suffered from glyphosate, from weed killer accidentally being trod or sprayed on your grass, then these microbes could potentially help you. So glyphosate definitely reduces the growth to some extent after it's been treated compared to virgin soil. The other thing about that is that it also binds the micronutrient. Which one is it? I want to say manganese, I think it is. And when you genetically modify crops to be resistant to glyphosate, so you can spray them on the crop, then they often get manganese deficiency, and the microbes suffer as well because they need a lot of manganese as well. So it can bind up the essential element in the soil. So that's something to consider. Now, what else can we say about glyphosate? Obviously, it said it's not something you actually apply to the turf, and you'll often see reports of people who've used it on paths and it's not dried and it gets walked onto turf or, heaven forbid, a golf green, a practice green probably around the clubhouse and things like this, and you get big footprints where people have walked on it. So that's something, we often get asked to look at ways to treat that. Best way to treat accidental herbicide damage is probably a humic acid and a seaweed treatment. The humic acid could bind some of the active ingredients, and the seaweed extract could get the grass growing better again once reseeding has occurred. So that's with glyphosate and any other non-selective herbicide. My top tip for using glyphosate is to always apply it on sunny days when it's slightly windy, not too windy, obviously, because you get drift spray. Really sunny days when it's warm, when it's not too dry, the soil's not dry, and as early in the morning as possible. So 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, if you can, and then as early, because you need to have that xylem running. You're basically adding a bit of toxin. Imagine you've got a motorway system. You're adding a bit of toxin to every car that goes over a bridge, and you want that toxin to spread throughout the motorway system, and you need the cars moving as fast as possible, as many cars moving as possible to be inundated with this toxin. If it's a cold day, if it's a winter's day, if the plant is dormant and you spray glyphosate, the weed will the cells where it touches will die because there's no xylem or phloem movement, there's no vascular movement of sap happening in that dormant plant or that plant that's not growing actively. So you want to get it early in the morning because you've given that as long a day as possible, as much photosynthesis has happened as possible. And so that's my top tip. Obviously, you don't want to be spraying it in the wind because you will get a dose. And even if you think glyphosate is safe, there's no logical reason to give yourself a dose of any chemical whatsoever. And it doesn't matter if you're spraying glyphosate or even a biostimulant or a fertilizer, you should be using PPE. If you've got your PA1 and your PA6 tickets, I seem to remember that from my horticultural days, and you're spraying with a backpack sprayer or even a one on the back of a tractor, you need to be protecting yourself from spray drift. So you need to have the correct PPE, certainly a mask and a Tyvek suit, gloves and safety boots, just because you don't want to be wearing trainers. Because if you give yourself a dose of herbicide on your shoes and then you get caught in the rain, they will seep into your trainers and to your skin and things like that. So disposable gloves as well, or probably disposable gloves is probably best. So glyphosate, even if you think it's safe, you still want to be reducing your exposure because there might be other nasty chemicals in there, in the surfactants and the other chemicals that go in to stick it onto the leaf and things like that. With a glyphosate, you're probably not going to be spraying it with the back of a tractor unless you're in agriculture. You're probably going to be using a backpack sprayer to spot treat it. Now, I said in domestic use, it's not glyphosate in the Roundup anymore. It's a mixture of like organic acids, I think, pelargonic acid and things like that. That's because the companies making it don't want to be exposed to any further legal cases. So I say it was made by Monsanto. Monsanto invented it. And then when GM crops came around, they had a second big boost in revenue because they could then genetically modify crops and sell even more glyphosate because they were resistant to glyphosate. And so you had this amazing boom in Monsanto. Obviously, Monsanto got a bad name because of the damage that glyphosate was doing to the wider ecological environment and just for GM crops in general. And so they struggled. And then Bayer bought them in 2018, which seems like a crazy move because you're basically tarnishing what is essentially a good German name with a, one that's been through the proverbial. And then these lawsuits have happened. So they've had a bad time of it recently, Bayer, and that's one of the main reasons for it. Monsanto have been linked to all sorts of crazy stuff as well, like white phosphorus manufacturing and things like this. So yeah, there is a dark history behind glyphosate and Roundup. Monsanto's original patent for glyphosate expired in 2000, and so there are other companies that manufacture it, and you will find glyphosate on sale that is not Roundup, and there are different versions, and people swear by different versions of it and things like this, and you often get asked for industrial strengths Roundup. There is resistance to Roundup in certain plants. However, the good news for turf care is that the only case in the UK is Italian ryegrass, which was found to be resistant to glyphosate in Kent in 2025. So a very recent finding. But Italian ryegrass, Lolium multiflorum, is a turf grass species, so it's not going to be too bad unless it starts to invade, areas where you don't want grass. But in turf, you probably want grass everywhere, so I'm not too worried about that. It's whether, whether weeds of paths and things like this become resistant to it, then that would be more of an issue. Mosses are largely resistant to glyphosate. Now, obviously, you're not spraying it on the lawn anyway, but that's interesting because if you were growing like a Japanese moss lawn, you could potentially use glyphosate as a selective herbicide. I don't know if anyone's done that. Could be of interest. I might try that. Because Japanese moss gardens, if you're talking premium turf care, and show-stopping ability, then a Japanese moss garden is up there with a chamomile lawn, really, for impact, certainly in the UK, because I don't know anyone who's growing moss lawns in the UK. If you know of someone, then let me know. But I've only ever seen them in Japan. So that's something to consider. You may struggle to control things like ivy with glyphosate. That's a particularly troublesome weed that people struggle with glyphosate Roundup. That's why at Utrema we developed ivy pre-spray. And that is not a herbicide. That is a product that you spray onto ivy 2 to 3 hours, or an hour to 3 hours before you spray your Roundup, your glyphosate on, and massively increases the effectiveness and the kill back on the ivy. So if you've got an ivy problem and you've struggled with weed killer in the past, then definitely check out Utrema's ivy pre-spray. It's available on our website, 5 litre bottle. Really good results, really good reports back from that. And then finally, there is scope in the future for automatic weeders that give a little tiny spray of a weed killer rather than blanket treatments. So you could potentially have a little robot or a little attachment to a mower that detects weeds via a camera, and then the computer identifies the weeds and sprays it with a little bit of weed killer. And it doesn't need to be a selective weed killer because it's only a tiny drop or a micro spray in that one particular area. So you could have something that looks like a boom sprayer, but is actually very selective, and it could go over and spot treat like that. Could massively increase the control of weeds in turf and in agriculture in general. One of our customers at Utrema, we sell into many sectors of agriculture and horticulture, as well as turf care, hydroponics. And one of our customers is an organic carrot farmer, and they have a machine that they spent over £1 million on that goes over the field and laser kills all the weeds, kills them with a high-powered laser. However, that wouldn't work in turf because the energy required is massive. And even if you could afford the machine, which obviously is at the scope of pretty much every turf care provider apart from maybe Wimbledon, they can only kill weeds when they're in the seedling stage. So when the carrots are just coming up and the seedlings are competing with other seedlings, once they get their true leaves, then there's just not enough energy in the laser to kill them. So if you think about in lawn care, a massive dandelion would require a sort of military grade laser to kill it. So lasers are out, but micro sprays of weed killer potentially are in. Not in the next few months, but hopefully come around the corner. Maybe AI integrated. Then there could be a robo weed killer available for lawn care providers, probably in sports turf first, I would imagine. Okay, so that's been Grass Me Up. I hope you found this interesting. Going to do a lot more podcasts this year. I did a lot on hydroponics last year, but the hydroponic industry in the UK is dead. Vertical farming, indoor farming, it was a tough year for that, so I chose the wrong sector. So hopefully I'm not bringing my bad luck to the lawn care sector, and hopefully it will grow alongside this podcast. I did try and record this on a video, and then I just got sick of looking at myself on the video. So I'm not going to be posting videos onto YouTube regularly. I'll record a quick summary video about what I'm going to be talking about, post that to socials and things like that. But hopefully a lot of you out there in lawn care listen to podcasts when you're doing things that don't require heavy machinery in your vans and things like this, and on your tractors if they're nice and quiet. If you've got noise cancelling headphones. So I think it's a good podcast for us to look at, and there's loads of subjects we can cover. I'm not setting a specific date to publish a podcast on, so it's not going to be every Wednesday or anything like this, or every day like my previous podcast, but it will be when I think of a really good subject. And I saw that table about, glyphosate is completely non-toxic, look at the LD50s, and thought I had to call them out, and I call them out on a podcast. So don't ignore that. The issues with glyphosate are not acute toxicity, it's long-term toxicity. The science behind it is more complex than a single graph. There are lots of things to consider. I've not taken an opinion either way because I've not looked into it, not done enough research, because I don't sell glyphosate. I don't work with glyphosate. But if you do and you've got an opinion, then let me know. Okay. Email us, leave us a DM, give us a ring. All right. Always up and happy to talk to lawn care enthusiasts. That's been Grass Me Up for today. Hope you enjoyed listening. If you could leave an Apple Podcast review, that would help the show tremendously. I say this every time and nobody leaves a review. And so, yeah, you will be in my good books, and you will receive lots of goodies next time you order from Utreamer if you did that. If you are not on Apple, don't bother leaving a review, because Spotify, things like that, doesn't really work. Maybe YouTube or something like that. Just make sure you click follow so you don't miss an episode of Grass Me Up. And check out utreamer.co.uk, because everything we sell is unique to us. We don't make copycat products. We produce premium products that you won't find anywhere else, like Ivy Pre-Spray, which helps massively increase the effectiveness of glyphosate. All right, I'll stop babbling and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.